All right. I want to talk today and start somewhere that may make you guys feel a little bit uncomfortable. I want to start with a shift in the ER. Not the best shift and certainly not the worst, but just a shift, the kind that looks routine on paper and then it doesn't. If you guys listening here have worked in the ER, you know that there's a certain rhythm to it, a noise floor, if you will, a vibe. And sometimes there's a pace that we learn to operate inside of until it just feels completely normal. And then you step outside and realize there's nothing normal about it at all. We triage fast. We assess fast. We categorize our patients fast because if we don't, we drown. And that's not a flaw, that's survival. And that's just part of the job. But here's what I think nobody's telling you in nursing school, that the same skill that keeps you functional in a chaotic department can also make you miss something that changes a person's life. Efficiency is a clinical virtue until it isn't. So the call comes in from the ambulance phone, intoxicated female in her 20s. That's two words, intoxicated female, that I want you to sit with and what those words do inside a busy ER department. They trigger a script, is what they do, and not a malicious one, but an automatic one. Intoxicated female means altered mental status, probably combative, probably not a reliable historian. The workup's going to be messy and the bed turnover will be slow. That's pattern recognition. And that is over 10 years of shifts talking to you right there. And I'm going to be honest with you because that's the only way that this conversation is worth having. Now, I felt that when that patient came in, her friends were in the waiting room and she comes in screaming and she starts saying that she was raped. And those three words really just sat with me right there. And immediately we brought her into the room and I talked to the police officer that was with the two friends. They were older. She was underage. They were invited to, quote, an older party. And their friend said, I don't think that happened. But they were also under the influence as well. She was crying, she was screaming, and every now and again, she said, I was raped. And through that noise in the department and whatever substance was in her system and whatever happened to her body in the hours before she got to us, she said those three words clearly enough that I heard every single one of them. I was raped. And now here in that moment in the emergency room, we know that, again, like I said, sometimes they're not a reliable historian. Maybe she's thinking that she's going to get in trouble, so she wants to push the blame off of someone else. In that moment, I was her nurse, and the provider wasn't certain. They never are we really even certain, but I called the sane nurse. I had talked with the provider and I said, well, I am going to call the sane nurse out because this is something that we need to take seriously. And when I looked at her presentation and at her in her eyes, something inside of me said, this is not the same thing. You know, intoxicated and raped are not mutually exclusive. And certainly it is not our job to decide which one is true. That night really changed everything. And I met not too long afterward Heidi Chance, who is our guest today. She is a retired detective who still works in the field. And I thought I'd bring her into this conversation to get a take on what sometimes we miss, what signs we need to see, and when do we call that sane nurse out to examine? Because at the end of the day, all I know is that I don't know what happened to her after that, but I know that evidence was collected and I felt like I did my job. So welcome to the show, Heidi.
Thank you so much. And that's it's an example of all of us. We all go through situations where we have certain biases about the situation before it becomes, too light what we really need to be doing. And I think that's what's important is sticking to what will actually help someone and set aside any of those biases. But yes, thank you so much for that because that's definitely it sounds like something that happens quite often, and that's something they know that as an investigator, of human trafficking that I've experienced with victims that have described things that have happened to them. So, yeah.
Yeah, so tell our listeners a little bit about your background, and then we'll get started on some burning questions that I have for
Okay.
you.
Yeah. So I am retired from Phoenix Police Department. I spent 25 years there. And I
Wow.
spent, yeah. And then I spent 14 of those years as a female undercover working sex trafficking as my job all day long. The way that I kind of fell into that situation, because a lot of people wonder, well, like there's a lot of jobs on the police department that you could do. You could do robbery detective, homicide,
Mm.
canine, school resource officer, all kinds of different jobs. So what happened was I was a school resource officer when I decided to start a family and have my son. And I went to a school in West Phoenix, and basically I blinked and 6 years went by. And I was, very happy in that position. And we don't get to take the police car home, unfortunately, in
Yeah.
Phoenix because that car is driven like 20 hours a day. So you have to return the car every day. And so I was at the Maryville precinct returning the keys one day, and I walked through an area of the police station called the juvenile holding area, which is basically 2 rooms that kinda keep juveniles that we might have in custody or have contact with away from adults that are in custody. And so in the 2 rooms, there's a little window in the door, and I remember passing by the window, and I kinda passed by, and then I peeked back in. I'm like, "Wait a minute, I recognize that little girl sitting in there." And she recognized me because I was the officer at her school when she was in 7th or 8th grade, a couple of years prior to this day. And on this day, she was still a juvenile. She was, I think, 16 or 17, 17, almost 18, somewhere in there. And I peeked my head in and I asked her, "Well, what's going on with you? How come you're here?" And that's
Mhm.
when she told me that she was under arrest for prostitution. And by that time, I had already been a police officer 7 years. I knew prostitution was a crime. I just didn't realize that children get involved in this. Like, it was like a, "What do you mean?" type of moment for me. And I think that, that in combination with, if you recall, there was an incident involving a little girl that was, a missing juvenile that had met a male and female, I think 19, 20-year-old, and they basically were holding her in their apartment, and she
Yeah.
was held in a dog crate, if you
Oh,
remember that case.
no.
Yeah, so she was held in a dog crate, and then men would come have sex with her at the house. And mom, for whatever reason, sent officers there 3 times. The first 2 times, she was probably too scared to make a noise, but on the 3rd time, they found her hidden in, like, a water bed, like an raised water bed that kinda had, like, a center area, and she was, like, in there, and she must have made a noise, and they were drawn to, "There's a person underneath this bed," and found her. So, I think that that in combination with my experience with that little girl really started sparking my interest into what is this. At the time, it was the Vice Unit and what they do, and so I started doing shadow, like, temporary assignments with them because
Uh-huh.
I was still working as a school officer, but I would, like, do one of my shifts during the week working nights with them. And I remember my very first day of being a female undercover acting like a prostitute. We were on 51st Avenue in McDowell, and it is both east and west of 51st Avenue on the south side of the road. There are several hotels there. There's probably about 12 hotels in that area, just that area. And I remember we
Hmm.
were working out of one of the hotels, and I literally walked to the street, and there were buyers and purchasing people for sex. They were swarming around like bees. And within 45 seconds, I had a vehicle pull up on me, and a male individual was actively masturbating himself and then asked and solicited a sex act from me. So, obviously, giving the indication that he is a suspect in this solicitation arrest. He was arrested, but it was one of those where we could do probably 15 to 20 arrests a night.
Wow.
Yeah. So we had 3 or 4 girls that would just switch out, and whoever was out on the street, they'd get their deal, go start their report, the next girl would come out. So, and that is to this day pretty much a frequent type of situation for those kind of operations.
So it's still going on. I
Yeah.
mean, as much force that you guys put out there, police officers, they
Mhm.
took their chance. Today's episode of Nurses Out Loud is sponsored by West Cocoa Pharmacy and Compounding in Cocoa, Florida. They partner with licensed providers to compound ivermectin and other repurposed drugs, plus integrative protocols for people working with their oncology team, along with low-dose naltrexone, methylene blue, bioidentical hormone replacement, and men's health formulas. And my favorite part is you can speak to Nurse Donna for free. Learn more at cocopharmacy.com. COCOA pharmacy.com. This is educational only, not medical advice.
Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons and explanations, in my opinion, from my experience as to why this problem is not getting better. In fact, I think it's getting worse. Part of that is my own witness to the evolution of law enforcement's response to this problem. When I participated in that undercover operation, that was something that they did every once in a while. The main focus at the time when I first went to that unit and tested for a position and got it was, and I tested for there's only one allowed female position for each squad. And there were 2 squads at the time. There were 3, but unfortunately, right around that time, they had to eliminate the 3rd squad. So that was because at that time, our response, law enforcement's response, was you need male undercovers to act as sex buyers to arrest prostitutes. And that's what we did all day long. Nothing else. Now, I'm happy to say I've witnessed the evolution of law enforcement's change in this, where we recognized that we were probably arresting potential victims. And now those squads are female undercover detectives outweighing the male undercover detectives because we realized that you need female undercovers to target sex buyers and traffickers because female undercovers really are the front line in this fight against sex trafficking. So
Right.
that is what we're doing now. You cannot do just that one side of it. You have to change the law also. And to put it in perspective, in Arizona, all of Arizona, prostitution's a crime. And when we're talking about sex trafficking, that's pretty much what we're talking about. And it is a class 1 misdemeanor for a person to purchase a person, which would be the buyer, the solicitor. Now, if a male detective was engaging in a conversation with a female and we were arresting her for prostitution, in Arizona right now, there is a law on the books that talks about how if she is arrested, her 4th conviction in a 5-year period is a felony. She can go to prison and have a felony on her record. I can arrest a sex buyer 30 times, and there is no felony right now on the books for a sex buyer, and they're the ones contributing to the demand for this whole issue in the first place. So this is where we can spin our wheels all day long as female undercovers, arrest, arrest, arrest. But if they're not getting anything more than a slap on the wrist, we're not really doing anything. That's one explanation to why this is still a problem and not getting better.
Yeah.
Because we really need to. And yes, if it's a juvenile, they get a felony, but I'm talking about adults purchasing adults. That is still not seen as serious. And that is why this problem is allowed to explode the way that it is, because unfortunately, that's what's happening with buyers. And I think a lot of that is derived from, having in the palm of your hand videos that you can watch, like
Yeah.
OnlyFans and Patreon and people doing sexual content. But that only lasts so long before these buyers are not aroused by that anymore or excited by that anymore, and they have to act out on it in real life. That is what I also think is a driving factor to contribute to this demand problem is many, many things. And
Yeah.
we are, working on legislation to make it more stricter of a punishment for buying a person, buying an adult, which is what we really need.
So 2 thoughts come to mind is one, it's the year 2026 and the victim keeps getting victimized. No, like, okay, let me ask you this. Out of the female and maybe even male prostitutes that are out there, how many of them do you think chose this path? Am I asking this correctly? Like, or
Mhm.
yeah, how many do you think
Yeah.
chose them or were trafficked into it and, you know?
Yeah, so it's not that I can put a number, although we are doing better putting a number to this crime with a partnership through ASU. ASU
Mm.
has the sex trafficking intervention research portion of the college. So police officers were really good about writing in our police report, white male, 5'7", brown hair, brown eyes, lives at this address. We're not so good at putting a number to, if you were to ask me, in 2024, how many men did we arrest for soliciting prostitution? I wouldn't be able to tell you. I don't know. But ASU could, because that's where the data is actually coming from. And they're doing not only Arizona, they're doing Hawaii, of course. That was probably their first, like, let's go to Hawaii to do research.
Yeah.
And then Las Vegas and other states. So they're really doing a great job to put a number to this crime as far as that goes. But as far as victims, I think that the issue is that this is a unique type of crime where victims don't even realize they're a victim.
Mm.
Traffickers are very good at making you think this was your choice, that you were in on it, that you benefited from it, that you made money, even though these victims, most of that I've talked to in interviews, have never actually kept any of the money that they made. They gave it all to their trafficker. But they believe all of the false promises, which is part of the element of this crime, is the fraud. That, dangling this little carrot over here, I'm going to get you a car, I'm going to get you in a beauty school, I'm going to get you an apartment, all of those things that are maybe going to happen someday. Unfortunately, they're very skilled at making victims believe that.
Mhm.
So they don't even think that they're a victim. They aren't
Mhm.
waiting in line to say, hey, Detective Chance, please come talk to me. Usually, when we come and interview them or catch them in some situation, they're uncooperative, they're combative, they're protective of the suspect. They don't want to participate in any case. They're in love with their pimp, and it's really hard to break that bond.
Right, and, that's kind of with the ER scenario. So it's to the point of having this young girl come in, and going through the whole same process to collect the evidence. For her, I saw it as because I interviewed, and I cannot remember the lady's name for the life of me, Pearl at the mailbox. Pearl
Yes,
at the mailbox, yeah,
Sherry,
and she
Sherry
what's her
Lopez.
name?
Sherry?
Sherry Lopez. Yes,
Yes.
guys. Pearl at the Mailbox is the name of her book. And she talked to me about how she was trafficked in high school. Some guy in band class befriended her. She'd go over to the house on the weekends. Then she started waking up and being like, what happened? She was drugged. Anyway, when she realized that she was being sexually assaulted, they said, oh, no, no, you're not. You liked it. Here's the video. And then they would show her the video. And then, this went on for years. Even after she graduated high school and everything, she left her parents and continued to be a sex traffic victim, if you will, because her parents were professionals, I think like a lawyer and a doctor or something. Then they started telling her that if she spoke out, that they'd make it public, showing what she did. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think for a lot of us, I'll speak for myself, 2020 woke up my eyes to a lot of different things. And one of them was sex trafficking. I thought it was this obscure thing that happened overseas. I didn't realize that this happened in America and certainly not in high schools at
Yeah.
parties.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so that's one of the other elements that I think it's hard for victims to realize happened to them as well. So the fraud was the false promises. And then the coercion is the other element. And if you don't understand what coercion is, even as law enforcement, you don't even know what questions to ask in an interview or how to discover that that was going on to even realize you have coercion. But basically, just like you were describing and how Sherry described her story, traffickers do a great job of getting to know everything about you. They want to know about your parents. They want to know where they live, what kind of cars they drive, where they go to work, how old your siblings are, all of these personal questions, because they use that information when they flip the switch and threaten you with that. And so I
Mhm.
have coined the phrase that a pimp is the most reliable person you will ever meet. And I say that because that is how this all works. They have instilled in a victim that if I say this is going to happen, it happens. They beat them up. They beat other victims up in front of them so they can witness this is the outcome if you don't do what I tell you to do. They threaten all kinds of things and they carry out just enough of these threats to have the victim realize they mean what they say, they mean business. And that means that if I don't abide by this stipulation or this rule or whatever they're telling me to do, then I will suffer the consequence. And that
Yeah.
consequence could be that my family member will be hurt. And so that is a super, critical thing for people to understand. And that's why when I talk about this to the public, I try and explain that the perception that people have of what it means to even be a victim of something or their perception of what trapped means really needs to change, because I am talking about a crime where this person may not even realize they're a victim, and this person is trapped and not free to leave, even though I might come in and testify as a detective that they're walking freely down the side of the road with a phone in their hand. The jury, the
Mhm.
public who participates as jurors, needs to understand that being trapped doesn't mean you have to be handcuffed to a bed or locked into a closet or a bedroom, and that that person's trapped because of the coercion.
Yeah, it reminds me of a few years ago when my son was 10 or 11, and one of his friends had sent a picture of his penis online. And this is when they were starting to become hormonal and a sex trafficker, maybe not a sex trafficker,
A
you know,
predator?
a predator, thank you. A predator found him online, and then he sent it, and then they started saying, "If you don't send me money, then I'm gonna tell your parents." Thankfully, he had a relationship with his parents where he could say, "Hey, I did this," and, they got the cops involved. But talk to us a little bit about that with our kids and the risk of being on the social media and that kind of stuff.
If you are a nurse that is fed up with the sick care model, I have a solution for you. My name is Melissa Schreidfatter, and I am the owner and founder of the Functional Nurse Academy. FNA is the most comprehensive functional medicine training program on the market, specifically tailored to nurses. It is self paced and equips LPNs, RNs, and nurse practitioners to practice functional medicine, address the root causes of dysfunction, and start their independent functional medicine practices. At FNA, you will learn how to order labs, functional health reports, create customized wellness plans, package and price your services, and even how to market your brand effectively. Graduates earn 90 nursing CEUs, and then they qualify for multiple board certification titles. They also will have access to our exclusive tools, such as our functional nurse toolkit, our social media and marketing kit. And I don't want to just train you and send you on your way. So you also will get access to me each month via the Functional Nurse Academy monthly mentorship program, where you will be able to attend a live class with me each month. So say goodbye to sick care and start your dream career as a functional medicine nurse. Enroll today at functionalnurseacademy.com.
Yeah, so what you're describing is sextortion, which is a little bit different than sex trafficking, but also a critical crime for everyone in the public to realize is happening every day right now. There are individuals out there, there are groups like if you've heard of 764.
Mm-mm. No.
Yeah, 764 is a group of individuals that just want to hurt people, and they target kids because they're susceptible to suggestion, and they are actually targeting boys a lot more than girls for this. But basically, they are learning everything about you, personal information, where you go to school. They're acting like another 12-year-old on a game or on
Mhm.
a social media platform. And then when they get them to send that harmful image, they flip the switch and they extort them. That's where the
Mhm.
money comes in and the demand for money. And that is causing kids to, unfortunately, who don't have a relationship with their parents, to commit suicide over, not having $5,000 right now. What if they really will carry out this threat that they're going to send? They just told me they know where I go to school, and they're going to blast my image all over the school. So unfortunately, they're taking that route and they're committing suicide over it. So it's very concerning, very, very much so, something that parents need to talk to their kids about it happening.
Mhm.
That's why I wrote my book, not just that, but also sex trafficking. But really, I wrote my book, Talk to Them, which is behind me right.
Let me see. Can you pull it up front for us too? Talk to them. Yeah.
I wrote it because I know that in being in law enforcement now, 27 years and I'm still in law enforcement, just with a different agency. We're overwhelmed. We couldn't possibly be anything but responsive right now because no one wants to be a police officer anymore. So we have less cops than we even had when I was a cop at
Wow.
Phoenix. And then we have a situation where we have a new app every other day, a new game every other day, all these social media platforms. And unfortunately, parents that are giving devices like an iPad to a 4-year-old, here, occupy your time with this iPad without any parental controls, without any conversation, without any monitoring, all kinds of situations. And these kids, the 4-year-old's going to expect that they always get the laptop or they always get the phone or the device. So when you want to take it away from them a few years later, that's going to be a big problem. And we know all the other circumstances with screen time and their
Mhm.
exposure to, you know, technology this early and all the other things that are surrounding that. But back to why I wrote the book is because we need parents to have these conversations with their kids. And I think it's not an easy conversation to have. And I try and explain the national average age of entry for a young person into sex trafficking when I first started investigating this crime back in 2007, 2008 was 15 years old. That age today in 2026 is 13 years old. And
Mhm.
recently we've rescued an 11-year-old out on the Blade, which is the known area for prostitution, sex trafficked. So that means this problem is getting worse. The victims are getting younger, and we need to do something about this. And it needs to be more than just law enforcement. So parents need to have this conversation with their child as young as 6, 7, 8.
Mhm.
That's really hard to do, and that's why I wrote the book about how to have this conversation, and I put in it strategies that I would use as a forensic interviewer conducting an interview with a victim that really doesn't want to talk to me, that I just barely met, and somehow with my skills, I'm able to get them to talk to me because I have investigations and cases that resulted in arrests. So that wouldn't be happening if I wasn't good at what I was doing. So that's
Mhm.
why I put my strategies into the book for parents to use as a plan to have these difficult conversations for the purpose of hopefully having their kids self-police themselves, is what I call it,
Yeah.
where in having a conversation with a potential stranger, which is what these people are, they're not people we know in real life. Because their parent told them, when this person starts asking personal information questions, starts being inappropriate with compliments, like compliments you shouldn't say to a 13-year-old that you're too sexy and those kind of things, that they'll recognize those things happening and then they'll stop talking to that person, that
Mhm.
stranger, and then they'll go tell their parents about it. And that is the ultimate goal
Yep.
in prevention of all of this. And that's why talk to them is very, very important to me. And then I had it translated completely into Spanish because I feel
Lovely.
it's a vulnerability for non-English speaking parents. If I was a pimp, if I was a trafficker, I would target a kid whose parents are not going to know what's going on because of a language barrier. That's an
Yeah.
easier target for me. So, very important to reach parents of all languages. I started with Spanish. Um, I'm trying to definitely promote that book in areas that I can get into if anyone has any ideas, because I don't speak any Spanish, but I knew it was important to have translated, so I paid money for that just to
That's
get it in the
wonderful.
hands of parents.
Yeah. Have you ever, done a talk at the library? I
No?
saw that the other day, having a talk, talking to the libraries and letting
Okay.
them know they'll put your book on the shelves as an local author. So that's what I would do
That's a good idea.
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. Okay, so that's a resource for parents.
Mhm.
That's awesome. So how about for nurses in the
Yes.
ER? Like, walk me through what a trafficked person often looks like when they arrive. What nurses could do about that, recognizing it.
Yeah. Very difficult to pinpoint like a certain demographic of
Yeah.
a victim because they could be anyone. And the same with suspects. Like our perception of what a bad guy looks like also needs to change because we're finding that they look like your neighbor also. But
Mhm.
as far as victims coming into the emergency room, I think there's some things to realize going on, especially with the people that arrive with them, because it's not going to be probably a situation where they arrive alone. I mean, very rarely, because these victims are under the thumb of a trafficker and they're not going to let them be unsupervised. They're
Mhm.
not going to be away from their moneymaker. And that's the thing I tell law enforcement too. You know, when you respond to these calls, I play a scenario video where a pimp was sitting out front and the officers walked right past the pimp. Didn't realize it. Of course, they see us before we see them because we're in full uniform and identifiable, but know that
Yeah.
the trafficker is going to be in a car or sitting in the lobby or sitting outside in the stairwell somewhere, never really far away from their victim. And I explain that to you because I want you to realize the people that arrive with this victim, one of them might be the pimp, or the pimp's waiting
Mhm.
outside because they don't want to be seen on camera. So,
Ah,
as far as the victim coming in, obviously, traffickers, they're very violent. And I know that people have different terms for traffickers, and some of that came from victims describing a Romeo pimp versus a gorilla pimp. Really, a pimp is a pimp is a pimp. A Romeo pimp who's built on his whole business on relationships could flip the switch in 2 seconds and backhand a victim and knock her teeth out. So
yep.
it is never anything that I want people that get boxed into, well, this is this type of thing. Because in this world, this is only about this person being successful, making money for as long as possible before they get caught. That's all they're about. So
Mhm.
bringing in this victim because they lost control and they may have beat them too badly. So now they're going to have to repair the damage they caused. And they're going to have this person, seen by a professional to get x-rays, repair a broken bone, whatever it is, because they need to have
Mhm.
them back out on the street to work.
Mhm.
They're going to be controlling the situation as much as they can, meaning they're going to be trying to protect the secret that
Mhm.
this is going on. So they're not going to want that victim alone with anybody.
Mhm.
So that's where I bring in the idea of all of a sudden we need a magic test, an MRI or whatever that has to go in through a machine and you can't be there because of radiation or whatever lie or excuse you have to make. And I don't mind if you lie to pimps because I would
Yep.
lie to pimps too to get that person alone because that's where you can actually ask them the questions of, are you safe? Is anyone making you do anything you don't want to do? I'm trying to help you if there's something going on here, those kind of questions. Before we get to that point, also, the people that are around, in addition to controlling what's being said, they're also trying to control what tests are being done, which means any collection of evidence. And they're also trying to control where that victim's property goes. So, like, if they
Okay.
showed up with a phone in their pocket and the fire people, like the pimp didn't get a chance to get the phone out of her pocket, and the fire department took that off of her when they, took off clothing or whatever, and it's in a bag, those people who arrived with that victim are going to be trying to get that bag because that phone could be evidence that goes to the police. So it's super important to make sure that the property that the victim arrived with stays with that victim. I mean,
Okay.
it could have DNA on it too, you know what I mean? So let's try and make sure, and I'm sure there's policies with the hospitals about the property that a victim arrives with.
Well, the only time that we ever take somebody's property is if they are suicidal or homicidal. Then we put their property in a bag with the patient label on it, and
Mhm.
then we, bring it to security or, behind the nurse's station. So in this circumstance, maybe like what would we do? Take the bag
You
out of
could
the
have
room?
security
Yeah.
come in, especially
Mhm.
if these people are like, "Oh, wait, why are you taking their stuff?" Or, "We can take it. We'll take it home. We'll make it safe. This is my sister, my homegirl, whatever." Have security come, take it, and just say it's our policy. She arrived
Mhm.
with it. This is hers. We're responsible for it. You know what I mean? This is our policy. You
Mhm.
don't have to tell these people anything, but
Right.
that's what I would say. Yeah,
You
because
know,
they're definitely trying to make sure that the law enforcement can't get that property.
can't get that. So
Mhm.
this you just triggered I swear I have so many stories that I forget about, right? Because I think that's like my coping mechanism. I pray for the
Same.
people and then I leave and
Mhm.
then I forget. But that just reminded me I not too long ago had an older woman and she had just had a baby and brand new, couple days old and came in and was beat up. And she said, I fell. And when I started asking questions, immediately she was not answering them. And I knew. And then she said, listen. and she got mean. I am only here for you to look at, whatever it was, right? I don't wanna give too many details. And she's like, "I'm not asking any questions." Even how old the baby was, where she gave birth, all and she just did not wanna ask any questions, and I knew that there was something. I don't know if it was sex trafficked or if it was just an abusive spouse or partner or whatever, but what resources in Phoenix, do we have? Because I would, basically was like, "I know what's going on here," I've seen it before, but I didn't know exactly what to just slide and give it to her and be like, "Here, do what you will with it," you know?
Yeah. So, and I think, and I've done training like this, well, actual training for almost every major hospital in the Phoenix area. And I always get the question of, well, what do we do if we know something's going on, but we can't even call law enforcement because this person's an adult? And it's always do the best job you can to document because, and that's the same thing we do as law enforcement. We respond to call after call after call of the same house. And then when they're ready and they disclose what's been going on, we can use all of those prior reports, all those
Mm.
prior contacts with law enforcement to tell the story. Because a lot of times these cases are that person's word against this person's word. And the only way that we solve these cases is corroborative evidence. And that history and good documentation of every time that that woman has come into the hospital and this is what happened. I don't know if you're able to take photos or if that's an instance where you can secure the video footage of her coming in so that we can see what she looked like. Save it for the next time. Save it for the next time. Save it for the time that she's ready to disclose.
Gotcha. So documentation.
Yeah.
So for this patient, for example, what would that documentation say when a patient refused to answer questions? Would like what should it
Yeah.
have
If
said?
you could, and I don't know if you guys have the time to do this, but maybe describe all of the injuries that was observed.
Yeah, we do.
If you're not able to, take a picture or videotape, and then the demeanor,
Hmm.
and then the other circumstances, they arrived with someone, they arrived with no one. I mean, I had one lady, literally, she was in the trunk of a Maserati, dropped off at Paradise Valley Hospital, literally on the ground at the doors that come open with motion sensing, and then they took
Hmm.
off, and security saw her on the ground there, and she was almost dead because of the beating that she suffered so bad. So, obviously, we've got the video footage of that vehicle leaving and them dropping her off, but, it's where just the best documentation we can until they're ready. Because she was cooperative, but then she
Hmm.
changed her story later on, you know what I mean? So it's one of those where almost like a person on drugs, until
Yeah.
they're ready to stop or die, that's the only thing that will get them
Hmm.
off the drugs. They have to be.
From your experience, like, what is there anything that a nurse could say, like, in those first few minutes that allows a victim to, like, open up the door or close the door permanently? Is there something, I know we can't do
Yeah.
not judgmental.
Yes. Yeah, and I'll get to resources too. Sorry, I went off on a
Yeah.
tangent, but I think it's important to know. But as far as rapport, I think is what you're describing in the first couple
Yes.
of minutes. It's hard for all of us to build rapport, but definitely not being judgy, not being condescending, those kind of things go a long way. It's going to be difficult. It's not like some magic phrase that I know of that
Yeah.
we could say to someone to make them talk to us and tell us their darkest secrets, but just be understanding, talk about, I had even unrelated to this person say, man, your injuries are very similar to someone that I saw earlier today. And this is what happened with her. And then she told me this happened. And then maybe, making the focus not be on her, but be on
Um,
you're intending it to be on her, but for her to realize, man, this happened to someone else. I don't want this to continue to happen to me. And I wonder if that someone else is also a victim of this same person who did this to me in these instances. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
something
Right.
like that.
Talk a story about someone else and what you
Yeah.
see, because she knew that I knew,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, she knew.
Of
So
course.
resources, what could I
Yes.
have given to her?
Yeah. So in that situation, maybe it's a domestic violence partner, abusive partner. There is you, mom, because I don't know. And this is
Mhm.
the other thing, like there's shelters and there's places, but insurance, who's going to pay for it? all those things come into play. Like if she doesn't have access already on established for herself. So I think in doing a lot of these talks and a lot of this training, I usually ask is social services in the room, because I think they need to know all about this as well, because not only are we recognizing and identifying, but if we're going to be able to get this person help and get them out, those people need to know all the dynamics of this situation. But yes,
Mhm.
there's UMOM, there's Catholic Social Services, Jewish Family Services. Specific
Okay.
to sex trafficking, there is the Dream Center. If you've ever heard of the Dream Center, they're kind of rebranding. It's called
Okay.
Phoenix Where Hope Lives now, or Where Hope Lives. But
Okay.
it's like an old hotel. Unfortunately, it's right by Alaskan Bush Company Strip Club at 35th and Osborne. But it is an old hotel that they renovated a bunch of rooms, because we do recognize that obviously a lot of trafficking happens in hotels. But
Yeah.
these rooms are renovated into like little single apartments with a kitchenette and everything. So in that way, it feels more like an apartment. But they accept victims from law enforcement. I'm sure they accept victims from hospitals.
Oh. So do you guys just drop them off straight away?
We can at any time,
Oh,
day or night.
okay.
And, they have to submit to the rules of that placement, because
Mhm.
they have to protect the other residents there. Like they can't have a phone for a little while, because they need to like figure out, is this a situation where your pimp is going to show up here and, cause a scene or hurt someone else to get you, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So it's a good place, as far as we didn't have anything for the longest time.
Mhm.
So, we're spinning our wheels over here, but we have nowhere to take a victim we might be rescuing. So we have that. We have ASU actually just opened up the Starfish place, which is
Okay.
another resident program. New Life Shelter. There's several that law enforcement has, like the backline phone number to call at 2 a.m. to get a victim placed. And then as far as juveniles, we do have placement for juveniles also, because we realize that prior to 2017, I think it was, if we rescued a juvenile that was in Department of Child Safety, Child Welfare,
Uh-huh.
we would call DCS, Department of Child Safety, and we'd say, "Hey, I need to go bust down doors and get the bad guy. Here's this kid." And then they would come and they would call, "Hey, random group home, do you have an available bed?" And they would take them there. And then once they got there, not only did not stay in placement, they also kind of, I mean, it's awful to say, but it's the reality of the situation. They infected the group home of the other girls there, who didn't know you could make $80 in 5 minutes giving someone oral sex. And then they were recruiting out of that group home, "Hey, girl, come meet my daddy." And then we'd have more juveniles than the original juvenile out there
Mhm.
being trafficked. So to stop this whole situation, we came up with a protocol and basically a multiple disciplinary team, because we have an entire team of law enforcement, or the transportation. We have the placement, which is a facility called Mine 24. We have Department of Child Safety, which will grant temporary custody of this juvenile to that placement. And then we have Mercy Maricopa, which is the insurance company that pays the bill for kids in child welfare. And so
Mhm.
now with the protocol, basically we kidnap these kids for 23 hours.
Mhm.
And I'm joking when I say
Right,
kidnap.
right.
We place them in the special placement, where instead of going to a random group home, that gives DCS more time to find better placement, whether it's one of the 3 places we have here, or if it's transportation to a placement out of state, whatever it becomes. And then while they're in that 23-hour hold, they get to see a doctor, they get to
Mhm.
take a shower, they get to eat something, they get to go to sleep, they get actual like immediate resources, which they weren't getting before at a random group home, let's be
Yeah.
honest. And that, since we've been kidnapping them or holding on to them and not releasing them to anywhere where the pimp could get them, the pimps are freaking out because they're thinking they're snitching, and they dip. They take off, they leave the state, and then that makes it harder for that victim to re-link back up with that pimp, which is good.
Yeah.
Most of them stay in placement now because they think, well, shoot, he said he was going to come get me and then he took off. Well, I don't want to be with him anyway then. You know what I mean? So
Right.
it's
Right.
it's working. It's working, and it's much better than what we had before.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Yeah, that it's like, "Nope, you have to stay with us, and we're going to, just give you the resources, and then if
Mhm.
you wanna leave, then you can leave, but
Yeah.
at least you know that we're available and that these services are available to you."
Yeah.
That's huge, Huge. All right, Heidi, your website is
achanceforawareness.com, pun
Mm.
intended on my last name.
achanceforawareness.com. I love it. Can you tell me a little bit? I have here in my notes about this 493-year case.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
tell me a
so
little bit about.
absolutely. So it's a record for the United States, as far as I know. It happened in 2010 when a victim disclosed what was going on. And before I talk about that, I just want to say there's different types of trafficking.
Mm.
People associate, and maybe this is why it's harder for people to understand that it's happening here in the United States, in our own backyard, in our own community, because what's seen on TV and, movies kind of seems like it's international, like Taken,
Yeah,
and
right,
and there is international trafficking, which I kind of equate to organized trafficking with cartels and brothels and a connection to massage parlors, a connection to out of the country. There's that kind of trafficking. But then there's individual trafficking, individual pimps trafficking other individuals. And then in this case, it's familial trafficking, where the victim was trafficked by a family member, which is also a dynamic that I don't think people realize. And that's even harder for us to discover because it's something going on in the family behind closed doors, not as open as
right.
individual trafficking, where it's on 27th Avenue in your face. So this case actually involves 7 victims, 2 juveniles, and it was the niece being trafficked by her uncle and then his 17-year-old stepdaughter. Now that girl's mother, and this is what's also interesting about victims, is her mother was a Department of Corrections officer who lost her job, became employed at the strip club, and met the trafficker at the strip club and entered the life of prostitution in her 40s. Yeah. And that's something that people don't realize, that it's just kids or it's just the people in poor part of town, right?
Right.
In the instance, one of the other adult females, because there were 5 that we found that also testified, she was barely an adult, 19 years old. Her mom's a nurse. Her dad's, I forget what her dad does, but she's from Scottsdale, 19 years old, up at NAU on a scholarship, meets a guy on Craigslist that wants to take modeling pictures of her. She unfortunately shows up for that appointment, has sex with that guy. Then that guy talks her into meeting his friend, who's the trafficker, and she unfortunately decides to leave school and become a prostitute working out of his house at 28th Street in Thomas. And her entire life changed when she tried heroin, got super addicted to heroin and other drugs, got herself arrested for some other crimes, and is now a resident of the female prison. So her entire life
Yeah.
was going one direction, and now it's the other way, pretty much because of this issue. So
Yeah.
my point in telling you that is, obviously, very clearly, this is not just kids. This is not just people in the poor part of town. This is not just females, actually, also. There's male victims as well, just not in this case. It could be anyone. What it is all about is vulnerability of that person at the time and the skill of a trafficker able to exploit that. So with this case, it came to law enforcement's attention in 2010 when that victim, who was 13, when her uncle first had sex with her. She's actually from small area of Arizona, Taylor Snowflake area.
Okay.
And she got in some trouble in a small town. What do you do at 13? You drink underage and you get in trouble and
Mhm.
you get put on probation. So he was able to convince her grandma to bring her down to Phoenix to live with him, to give her some father influence and put her in school. But none of those things ever actually happened. And unfortunately, she was stuck in this situation with him until she was almost 17. And so for
Uh-huh.
several years, she was continuing to be assaulted by him, and then also had to work as a prostitute out of this brothel until she disclosed to her sister what was going on. And then that came to the attention of law enforcement in 2010. And I bring that date up because in 2015 is when we finally went to trial. And it wasn't because we weren't ready. It was a
Mhm.
tactic on the part of the defense, mainly because they knew delay, continue, delay, continue. They knew that if a victim, and we had 7, if they don't show up to testify, it's as though these things never happened. So
Yeah.
they delayed and delayed and delayed. And that's part of the problem with these cases also, is that victims don't want to play the game of 1, 2, 3, 5 years before this goes to trial or gets resolved. They bow out. They tell us they don't want to press charges anymore. The whole case gets sidelined because, unfortunately, I cannot speak for you as the victim
Yeah.
of a crime. You have to, defendant has the right to face their accuser. So you have to come in and testify in front of the
Mhm.
jury and everything. And that's really scary, really hard to get victims to come all the way to that point, especially 5 years later. This case,
Mhm.
we were able to get 7 of them to show up to testify, and he was found guilty on 101 out of 105 counts of sex misconduct with a minor, dangerous crimes against children, sexual assault, sex trafficking, all kinds of charges that we were able to establish. And he was found guilty and was sentenced to 493.5 years.
Wow, that's awesome. That is awesome. Do you know, like, out of those 7 children, how many of them were in contact with a health provider, a school nurse, an ER, like, anyone with a clinical eye before your investigation concluded?
Well, I know that um, he more controlled them with drugs.
Mhm.
So I know that the one girl, the 19-year-old, kind of had an issue heavily with drugs, and I think she did go to the emergency room a couple of times. I think I want to also tell you the dynamic of a trafficking situation, especially when we're talking
Yes.
about individual traffickers. There's a hierarchy, meaning there's a term called the bottom, and the bottom's actually the top person, the person that's most loyal to the trafficker, has been with them the longest, might have children in common with them, will put vehicles and hotel rooms in their name. They will collect money. They will post advertisements online for the other victims. They will carry out punishment. They're loyal to the trafficker so much that they don't have to be around the bottom. They trust the bottom to handle business. And I bring that up because it could be a situation where the bottom took her to the emergency room, and that bottom
Yeah.
was that Department of Corrections officer, unfortunately. Um, so you would have seen 2 women come into the emergency room with a
Mhm.
drug problem. The other one that looks like she probably was also using drugs, but not to the point where she's overdosed at this time. That might have been what was witnessed by that emergency room staff. Very hard to
Mhm.
direct that back to an entire sex trafficking prostitution ring. But, it's one of those where maybe they witnessed her trying to speak for the victim, make
Mhm.
sure that they weren't taken away, those kind of things going on. It's definitely difficult to discover.
It's so difficult because I'm thinking like, what could a nurse do? We couldn't call your department and say, "Hey, we have this," because that's HIPAA. They have to be
Mhm.
willing, we can't give you any heads up that we saw, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. So, but juveniles, if it's an underage person, you mandatory reporter, you can.
yep, CPS, right. So if a nurse had called CPS like earlier in that case, say, what would you have needed from them? Like what would have actually been useful for them to say?
So you're saying they don't call law enforcement and CPS, they only call CPS?
Right, like, what if we have an instinct like, "Oh, maybe we should call CPS on this one. There's something going on here." Like, what would have been useful, I guess, for this case where
Well,
we were talking about documentation and
yeah. Well, I think, and I don't know if it's a policy where you only call CPS, because CPS also may not realize it's a sex trafficking. You know what I mean? So I
Mm,
think maybe if it's suspected sex trafficking and you have the elements of these people trying to control the property, control what's being said, control the tests being done,
mhm.
it's more than. I don't know if that is a
Yeah,
violation of your policy to also notify law enforcement to at least attempt a contact with this person.
okay.
Then, and this is the other mountain we're climbing uphill. You've got lots of law enforcement out there that doesn't also see sex trafficking as sex trafficking.
Mhm,
Because and I say that because in 2014, that's when we started training our own officers in Phoenix. Back in 1998 I was in the police academy and I'd never had a class on human trafficking. So you have a whole bunch of
oops.
cops out there that might show up to the hospital responding to your call that never had a class on human trafficking. It's going to take
Mm,
you convincing that officer
mhm,
also that, hey, I think this is sex trafficking and here's why. Can you please interview them? And if they aren't comfortable, there are 2 detectives on call 24/7 at Phoenix Police Department to respond out from
mhm,
patrol's request to conduct an interview or at least see. And certainly if this is an outstanding runaway juvenile,
mhm,
and they're high risk because maybe they were recovered in the past on 27th Avenue or had disclosed some, parts of a conversation that might be sex trafficking. We
mhm,
have a high risk runaway program now where if they run away again, they get bumped up to high risk. Then we definitely will respond out and attempt to talk to them as a
okay.
forensic interviewer to see What's been going on with you since
Mhm.
you've been out on the run? How have you been getting around? Have you been getting fed? Where have you been staying? All of those kind of questions to see if we can determine if they're, um, certainly going to go into that protocol that I described. As even if they don't disclose,
Ah,
sometimes we put kids in
mhm,
that protocol because I mean, I've had a case where a kid was a suspected victim of trafficking, but she didn't talk to us until 5 months later, and
mhm,
that all through the work of a survivor victim advocate going to visit her at placement for months before
mm,
she was ready to say, "Okay, I'll talk to detectives now." And that's
gotcha.
fine. I still did a successful case. We went to trial. That trafficker's sitting in prison for the next 108 years. Not a
Mm.
problem, but it is, something to realize that it's when they're ready. Again, no matter.
Well, it's interesting too that you said that police may not even recognize this because in my scenario with the girl that came in with the ambulance and her friend sitting out in the waiting room, I had talked to the officer and the officer interviewed them separately. And he told me, I don't think that this is the case, that she was raped. But because of my experience in hearing about Pearl at the mailbox, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I thought, okay, maybe those older two, because they had told me that they'd been to these parties before. This younger one was not.
Mhm.
And so that's when I thought, okay, well, you know what? I'm just going to do my due diligence here. She was open to having Sane come in and take the
Mhm.
so that's why I had but a nurse probably would not have done that
Yeah.
because again, we get these learning modules of sex trafficking, but we get 60 other modules too, Heidi, that we're
Yeah.
not really it's not like we're really wanting to read all this, it's
Yes.
something at the end of the year that's like, you're not done, and if you don't do it, you're gonna get written up.
Yes.
But let's close this out. Like, let's make this actionable. So the nurse that's listening to this episode and she gets that call or he gets that call from the AMBO, intoxicated female. What are like three things that they should be doing differently with this patient or recognizing?
Well, and I think also, like, what they're wearing when they come in. I don't know if you've been near 27th Avenue recently, but it is pasties and thongs and heels, and that's all they're wearing.
Oh,
So I think seeing the attire that they're in and not passing judgments like they're a stripper or something, but recognizing that they may be forced to wear this kind of attire. It's not their choice, it's not their idea.
mhm,
It was purchased for them. Multiple cell phones. A lot of times they're not only
um,
working the streets, but they're also advertised online. And so each of the phones are connected to a prostitution ad that has history, that has buyers, that has regulars. So it's not normal for a person to come into the emergency room with 10 phones, but in this lifestyle, that is a very normal thing.
mhm,
And then again, the demeanor of the people speaking for them, trying to control the situation, control what's being said, what's being done, who's involved. Obviously, anytime any mention of we should call security or law enforcement and people react to that like, oh, why are you doing that? Have a problem with it, then that should be an indicator and a red flag that probably should have security come or the law
mhm.
enforcement respond because they're particularly upset about that,
Okay.
those kind of things.
All right. And what's that protocol called again? So if I'm talking to nurses, at work.
Well, I don't know that it has an actual name, but it's basically they should know about it because we used to take victims to Phoenix Children's Hospital
Okay.
or and we also took victims to what's the hospital on Roosevelt and 18th 16th Street?
St.
Um,
Joe's? No.
no, it was a behavioral health hospital, St. Luke.
St.
St. Luke. Yeah. So we that was where we held them for the 23-hour hold before.
Okay. All right. Well,
Yeah.
I'll just say a 23-hour hold and we
Yeah, it's
could
the
go from there.
sex trafficking protocol.
Sex trafficking protocol. Awesome. Well, your book, Talk to Them, again, guys, that's written for parents and caregivers. And we went through, if you have any questions for Heidi, I'd be more than happy
Oh,
to have her come on. She's one of the badass do
yeah.
gooders. We're both a badass do gooder. If you
Mm.
don't know what that is, you'll find out shortly. Yes. Thank you, Heidi. achanceforawareness.com. I will put all her links for her social medias in the show notes. And then also, too, make sure you're going to Nurses Out Loud Substack because it will have more in-depth resources and everything that we're going to pull from this episode. And any closing thoughts, Heidi?
Yeah. So I just want to say, if you've traveled recently, you know that there's the National Human Trafficking Hotline. The posters are in the bathrooms and the stalls and things. The National Human Trafficking Hotline right now is kind of under construction. It's under new management. It's not exactly working as efficiently as it was before, but that's okay because Arizona has actually established our own human trafficking hotline. And
Mm.
so I would encourage people to give that out. And that is something that nurses could provide to a suspected victim, because it's a survivor that answers that phone, a person that's been in their shoes. They also
Oh.
speak different languages, and they can obviously offer those services that I touched on immediately. Like they have the backline phone number to all those placements. So just providing, like, even if they're not going to disclose and you suspect a sex trafficking, providing the
Mhm.
national or the Arizona hotline to them. So then that way they can take that and, have it with them. And if they
Mhm.
leave the hospital and they think about all the things going on and how bad they got beat up and maybe they're ready, they can contact the hotline themselves.
And what's that number?
I knew you were going to ask me. I believe I'm going to have to Google it. And other states are also creating their own hotlines, by the way,
Okay.
so that
Do you think that's better for it to be state specific instead of national?
Well, so the National Human Trafficking Hotline was created for basically victims to get out of the life, but not necessarily involve law enforcement, which means if a child called the National Hotline, they're not mandatory reporters, or at least is the platform that was set up before. So they
Mm.
didn't have to call law enforcement, which is something we kind of have a problem with.
Yeah.
So, because if there's one juvenile, there's probably another. So it is important for, us at least to have the immediate response and law enforcement being involved and all those things. And some other states are definitely also agreeing with us. So let's see here. Arizona Human Trafficking Hotline. I believe it's 187.
The number 4, AZ
Uh-huh.
tips. Awesome. All right. A chance for awareness and get Heidi's book. I'm going to put the links for those in the show notes. With having a 16-year-old now and having these conversations with him, he definitely is more aware and has helped his friends out. There's more stories that I can share. But guys, first of all, it's having an open dialogue and letting them know that your children, especially if they come to you, that you're not going to punish them,
Yeah.
and that they can trust you. And so thank you, my friend.
Welcome.
Detective Heidi Chance. It's been a while trying to get you on
Yeah.
here. I see that you're really busy, and that's awesome. So many blessings to you. And until next time, friends, be safe, be well, and God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Nurses Out Loud. Nurses are called by our code of ethics to keep learning, do the research, and lead with moral courage and integrity, especially as healthcare changes. Keep doing the next right thing, especially when it's hard. If this show resonated with you, please like, share, and follow. It boosts us up in the algorithm so more people can find us. Until next time, friends, be safe, be well, and God bless. And if this episode offers continuing education credit, check the show notes for the learning objectives, disclosures, and exactly how to earn your certificate.